Hey everyone, welcome back to Storytime in the Bakery. This is episode 4, and in the last episode called Broken Equipment and Our First Holiday, my partner and I had just finished our very first holiday in the bakery, and that was Mother's Day. So we got a real quick realization that we literally bought a broken down business. Well, broken down equipment, I should say. The actual business was really great. Like, this bakery was really busy. So at this point, we were rolling into summer, and with that brings graduation parties for high school and college, as well as baptisms and christenings. So this basically means cakes, cakes, and more cakes. And if you know anything about owning a bakery, you know that cakes are what pay the rent. So in the last episode, I talked all about the oven and how it was just constantly breaking down. And I showed you just the type of oven that it was, like this huge 5-deck oven with like the motor that turned these decks around like a carousel, actually more like a Ferris wheel. But what I didn't talk about was the refrigeration issues that we were also dealing with. So remember back in the first episode where I talked all about the previous owner basically showing us his bakery for sale in the dark? Well, what we realized once we got in there as the new owners and really dug into and behind everything was that the refrigerators were probably in the worst shape out of all the equipment there. So the floor of this bakery was made out of wood. It was the original floor from 1969, and it was actually really quite nice to stand on. If you've ever had to stand on your feet all day, you know the difference between a wood floor and a concrete floor and what that could do to your spine if you have to stand on it all day long. So, you know, the wood floor was really quite nice to stand on, but these refrigerators were dripping with water, especially now that it's summer and there's no air conditioning inside the kitchen part of the bakery. So like these refrigerators were like Niagara Falls. So, you know, like a refrigerator actually will naturally leak some water from the condenser coils, but it's supposed to collect up in a pan underneath the refrigerator where then it will sort of evaporate without getting everything all wet. Well, we realized that our floors were being destroyed by the amount of water dripping off of these fridges and freezers. It was so bad that once we looked underneath them, they had put extra sheet pans on the floor under each unit, and each one was just filled with water overflowing onto the wood floors. So the floors were being destroyed. Like the weight of the refrigerators in some spaces were like breaking through the floor. So bookmark that one as we navigate through the summer months. And by the end of July, we absolutely knew we were going to have to close the bakery for a week in August to do a much needed renovation, whereas we first thought it was just the oven, and now we're realizing that it is literally everything. So how to prioritize, right? What do you do first when literally everything around you needs to be replaced or fixed? And if you've listened to my first 3 episodes of Storytime in the Bakery, you're all saying, oven, she's getting a new oven. But no, believe it or not, the refrigeration issues were way worse. Not only the subpar operation of them, like they were barely cooling to the proper temperatures, then with all the water leaking everywhere and ruining everything, we had compressors breaking in the height of a weekend push when they were all filled with whipped cream cakes. Like, the last thing you need is for your refrigerator to stop working. So also the fact that there just wasn't enough of it. Like I've always said, in a bakery, the most important equipment next to your oven is refrigerators, because we needed almost double the amount of refrigeration and freezer space than what we actually had. You know, we just got through a major holiday and realized pretty quickly that, wow, we need more space. So this was a major production problem because you can't produce what you can't properly store. So I actually want to interject something here because I feel like my explanation or my recollection or whatever is been coming off as really negative over these last few episodes, because as I retell all of this, I am definitely semi-reliving these experiences and just the overwhelm that I was feeling and the fear emotions, like it's all definitely coming up again. But at the same time, in retrospect, I do have to say that this was a really good business, and I don't think I fully ever appreciated that while I was in there, because all of the breakdowns and just chaos all the time coming from every angle was really just taking precedence. Like from the minute we stepped foot in that bakery to the last day I was there, I just had a lot of negative experience. And I guess I should really call it challenging experiences, because it was my own filter that decided everything was negative. And then I lived through that lens of negativity for a really long time. And I'll get to that part as we go along. And that sort of was coming through in a lot of different areas of my life. But, so like when I say, the previous owner sold us the bakery in the dark, suggesting that I was the victim to this guy. And that's not the truth. Like, we should have told him to turn the lights on. Like, you know what I mean? Just like looking back on it, I just don't want to paint myself as like a total victim to all of this catastrophe that was going on. But I guess what I'm saying is that everything in life can be viewed as a lesson or as punishment. And believe me, I lived as if I was being punished for some terrible act I must have committed in a past life or something, because what did I do to deserve this? But we were naive in buying the bakery, meaning that had we known we could actually say, hey, this equipment is garbage, like we'll give you 90,000 instead of 110,000, but we didn't do that because, first of all, we didn't realize the scope of it all, but we didn't know that we could do that. And heck, we didn't even have the confidence at that time to tell the guy to turn the lights on. So again, I don't want to sound like victim, even though for many, many years, I definitely played that role very well. All right, so let's get back to it. My partner and I decided that the refrigeration was the first priority, and so by the end of summer, I started speccing out walk-in refrigerator freezer combos, as well as sketching out a new layout to kind of move things around for a better workflow, and determining that a whole entire set of these refrigerators was going into the garbage. Like, they were to the point of no return. And so we had this spot in the back of the bakery. I think I mentioned it in a previous episode. Like, my bakery was in a strip mall. So every store in the strip mall was just like a long and narrow store. But we actually had 1.5 spaces. So like ours was L-shaped, which, I mean, I guess it's good because we just kind of loaded it up with a lot of extra ingredients, and that's actually where the electrical panel was. But it actually turned out perfect that is where the walk-in refrigeration and freezer combo turned out to be a perfect fit. Like, wow, there's one thing in our favor. Like, it could not have been a better fit to take up that awkward, like, sort of waste of a space that we were paying rent for every month. So with this new installation, though, we realized that we were going to need an upgraded electrical panel, since ours was already maxed out with just the equipment that we already had. And I mean, just like, how did I get here? I just wanted to make cakes and cupcakes, and here I am moving giant refrigerators, fixing water-stained moldy floors that have been destroyed, and mold-infiltrated sheetrock, and like a whole new electrical panel. Like, this is crazy. But you know what they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and we can't stop now. We are in this, and it's only been 4 months, and I'm not even sure that I have slept yet. So I also want to pause here to say that as I'm bringing up all of these memories, a lot of it is still kind of foggy, because, I mean, I'm going back almost 20 years, and so much of it is like sort of blocked out of my memory for protection because it was so just horrific. But one thing I was trying to come up with, and talking with my ex-partner about this, I was like, how did we even come up with the money to do this renovation? I mean, the walk-in alone was $20,000. And then to upgrade an electrical panel and get a whole new sub panel. Now I remember my grandmother gave us a loan for $20,000, and then my partner's uncle gave us a loan for $30,000. I think it was 30. And I mean, like I said, the business was a good business. And even though everything sold for like $1, we pushed out thousands of things for $1. And then over the months, we were able to save a good chunk of it to, help in doing this renovation. Now, we did set up these loans with our accountant, and they were both fully paid back with interest. So, just like adding on more loans on top of the loans that we already took out to buy this business. But remember the name of my first business that I tried starting in the firehouse? Yep, Angel Cakes. Something in that name. All right, now for the renovation. This was the first time since we had bought the bakery that it actually all stopped. With the exception of about 5 hours a day, this little bakery was going around the clock. I would typically close the store at about 6 p.m. and then get finished and get myself out of there by 7 p.m. And then the baker would come in at midnight and we'd start it all over again. So what is that, like 5 hours of downtime? With the exception of Monday when the bakery was closed, but I would still go in every Monday to set up for Tuesday. And that was also the day that I would do the banking and the payroll and just anything else that needed to get done on my only day off, which was never really a day off since I had to go in anyway. So when people ask me, why did I sell the bakery? Yeah. Are you catching my drift yet? Literally every day for a minimum of 10 hours a day with just 1 week off a year after Christmas. And that was the week that I usually got sick and stayed in bed. So back to this renovation, we hit the ground running because we only had 1 week of downtime to get it all done. And I had an electrical company lined up to add in the sub panel, and we had a crane to lift the compressor motor to the rooftop for the walk-in refrigerator freezer. I also commissioned my boyfriend at that time to come in and help me to be sort of like a foreman because this was really getting overwhelming for me really fast. And so basically it was me, my boyfriend, and Drew moving giant refrigerators and freezers. And we even had a giant dumpster. And just like, I don't even remember how we got those 4 bum refrigerators that were like leaking to no return into that dumpster. Like, I really don't remember having much more manpower than the 3 of us, but somehow we did it. And it was just like opening up a can of worms. Like when we moved those refrigerators out of there, the wall behind it was soaked with mold. So now we're ripping out giant slabs of sheetrock. And luckily my boyfriend had carpentry experience. So, while this was all just an added gigantic pain in the boop, we totally handled it. I don't know how we did, but we did. And so the place was coming together. But the amount of heavy physical labor we put out during that week, after not stopping for a minute over the last 6 months in our new old decrepit bakery, was astounding. It's a good thing I was only 32 at the time because I can't even imagine doing this at this age. So anyway, we definitely finished it all in time and reopened the following Tuesday and ready for the upcoming holiday season. So anyone who's ever worked in a bakery or restaurant during November and December, you know what's coming. Like there's anxiety when November and December is coming in the restaurant business. But we were now armed with our brandy spanking new equipment. I mean, this walk-in alone was a dream come true. The amount of freezer and refrigeration space we now had was just awesome. We could stack crates full of frozen donuts and bagel doughs and preformed danishes and croissants, like with room for 2 full rolling racks in the center of the freezer, and then the walk-in had shelving from the floor to the ceiling for all the raw ingredients, with enough room for 4 more rolling racks in the center. So believe me, we were excited and ready for anything. All right, so every time I end off one episode of Storytime, I have intentions of including like the next sort of theme in the next one. And I promise to talk about not only the renovation, but my employees, the employees that we inherited when buying this bakery. And we had a kitchen staff and then the store employees. And, you know, that's like 2 separate departments. And don't forget, we inherited each and every person when we took over as the new owners in April. And, you know, what is it, August now? So we're still just sort of working through. We had not let anyone go yet. We had to get through our first holiday and really just kind of keep notes as to how things were working, what could be done better, who was valuable and who was sort of dead weight. And so let me start with the kitchen staff. I think I mentioned that there was a midnight baker, and then we had a bench mixer, and we'll call him Victor. Now, Victor was a very interesting personality. You know, the type of person where they're sugar sweet and very docile and agreeable about everything, kind of going out of their way to be Mr. Nicey, nice to your face, but you know they're M&Fing you behind your back. Like, that was the perfect description of Victor. So we got his number right off the bat. And he was kind of slow in the way he would work and shuffle around, and I don't know. So that was just him. I mean, he did pretty good work, but he was just kind of slow about everything. And he liked to talk more than he liked to really work. Now, Aldemar was the pot washer and the general cleanup guy. And he also jumped in from time to time to help with bench work, like forming danishes and things like that. Now, Aldemar and Victor had it out with each other more than once, and this is where the psychology of human nature becomes keen, because Aldemar would want to mop up the Niagara Falls of water from those horrific refrigerators that happened to be right behind the table where Victor was working. So Victor always took that as Aldemar intentionally wanting to trip him up and put water all over the floor behind him. And I can't say that that's not actually the truth, but to Aldemar's defense, he was just doing his job, which was mopping up the constant water spilling off of those refrigerators. So these two got into near fist fights almost on a nightly basis. And remember, this is all happening at 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. So there was that going on in the back of the kitchen. Meanwhile, I've got a store staff, which consisted of a 5 a.m. opener, even though the store didn't open until 6:30, and the kitchen staff set up every bit of the store with all the fresh baked goods. But apparently she felt the need to be there an hour and a half early every day to do who knows what until the store opened. Well, I quickly learned that this is what you call milking the clock, because once I did a week of store opening myself, I realized it only takes about 30 minutes maximum to brew a pot of coffee and check that the orders are ready for the day and packed up, and then open the blinds and turn the lights on. Like, that's it. So believe me, her start time instantly changed to 6 a.m. and I was able to save 6 hours a week in wages right there. Now, the next person came in at 7 a.m. just in time for the work week of customers coming in for their coffee and their bagel and whatever. And I would get there shortly after that, like maybe around 7 o'clock. And then I would start the cake decorating, answering phones, jumping in the store to help customers if they needed me, or, you know, even helping in the kitchen. So one thing that we made, or I should say Mario made and sold, was hand-decorated cookies on the daily. And if any of you know how long it takes to ice royal icing cookies, like, you know, this is a tedious job. And this was something that was primarily done by the girls working in the store in between customers. And this was something that I would jump in on as well. And it was just sort of like a constant work in progress of decorating cookies going on all throughout the day, every day. And I'm going to note here that cookie decorating was and still is my most loathsome task. I just don't have the patience for it. And, now that this is my business, the labor cost involved in one cookie far exceeds the money we were getting for them. And I absolutely hated the fact that we sold so many of them. But of course we did. They were like 50 cents a cookie. Like everything in that bakery was 50 cents. Why wouldn't people just buy sacks of them? All right, they weren't 50 cents, but I think the most intricate one was a Santa face cookie. It had so much detail and intricacy, and I don't believe it sold for more than $2 for one. Like, that's pure insanity. So, but as far as the personality in that store staff, my 5:30, or what was she coming in at 5, that I then put her to 6 o'clock. We'll call her Debbie. And she was clearly the alpha female, but that's not going to work anymore because guess what? I'm now the alpha female. So I got keen to her antics early on, but I also needed her in the beginning because she actually knew the most about the store part of the business. And it turns out that Mario seemed to just put her in charge over the last couple of years as he slipped out more and more. She was basically running his bakery for him, which is not a bad thing by any stretch. But with that authority that he gave her, she also did lots of things that sort of benefited herself and not necessarily the business. For example, showing up 90 minutes before the store opens to do 15 minutes of work was one of those things. But also things like talking on her cell phone on speaker while she decorated the cookies as there were customers in the store. Like, it just wasn't a good look. And she was quite lackadaisical and just would sort of sit back and direct everyone else what to do as she leaned on the table, munching on her lunch or whatever else. So, again, like, I don't know, maybe it was just me, but I didn't really like that look. It was just very unprofessional. So at one point it came clear to her, I think, that I was pushing to do more and more of the tasks and in record time because, well, I had to. Don't forget, we had mucho bills to pay. So my efficiency and productivity needed to triple. I needed to do the work of 3 people to be able to keep up with everything and crank out as much as possible so that we could make enough money to pay for it all. And I'll never forget, she once told me that, well, if you guys need to make all this extra money to pay for the bills, why don't you and Drew go get jobs somewhere else so that you can make more money? And then she and the kitchen staff would continue to run the bakery as it was. Like, what? Like, that was literally her serious solution to me. Why don't you two go get a job? Like, we just bought a job. The only people who aren't going anywhere are me and Drew, believe me. But for right now, overall, there was a ton of things that we saw right away, both in the store and in the kitchen, that were immediately changed in the interest of efficiency and productivity. And so we had a line of about 5 or 6 different varieties of fresh baked bread, and every day it got mixed and baked. And so there was a white bread variety and then a butter topped bread. And so Drew was watching the baker make a batch of white bread, and then he started to mix another batch of the same recipe of white bread. And he was like, what is this guy doing? Why didn't he just make a double batch? So then he proceeds to take 4 to 6 ounces, I'm not kidding you, of butter and plunge it into the top of each loaf of bread. And this was the butter top bread. And Drew's head literally exploded. And he was like, what are you doing? So the baker said, well, this one's the butter top and the other one was regular white bread. So yeah, I know you guys, your heads are exploding too, just by the sound of this inefficiency. And the kicker of this whole thing was that the plain loaf of bread was $2.90, and the butter top one with a 1/4 pound of butter on it was $3. Heads were exploding basically every day in that bakery. So it's just things like this that are really important in business when, again, all you can control is your labor and your food costs to a degree, and then, of course, your price of goods. And at this point, I don't even think we even started raising prices yet. And if I did, it was literally nickel and diming it across the board so that our customers wouldn't go crazy. So, all right, let's see. Where are we in this timeline? The personalities of everyone is really starting to come through. We're just realizing so many things that are being done inefficiently. We are fast approaching our first major holiday. Mother's Day is a big holiday, but that's just one weekend. Thanksgiving and Christmas last an entire month without stopping. But we're ready. We are back to work after a week-long renovation armed with brand new refrigerators and freezers. And then we get notification from the baker. He's not coming back to work. He decided he was going to go start his own bakery in another town. Yeah, as if that just happened. As if he hadn't been planning that for months and months, right? No notice, no nothing, just see you later. So now what? And so anyway, Drew stepped into the midnight baker role, but he only had to do it for a couple of weeks because one afternoon in walks Eli. Now, who the heck is Eli? Eli was a Haitian guy who worked for Mario years ago, and he was just stopping by on a whim to visit his old boss Mario, and he didn't know that Mario had sold the bakery. So you better believe when we found out who Eli was, we rolled out the red carpet and basically begged him to come work for us and get us through our very first Christmas season. And he did. And he actually started the very next day, I think. Thanksgiving, our first Thanksgiving was absolutely unbelievable. I think we produced nearly 200 dozen hand-knotted dinner rolls with hundreds, and I do mean hundreds upon hundreds of pies, not to mention all the cookies and the cakes and the Danish and the breads and the donuts. This little bakery was bursting from every inch with orders for the entire town. But I'll always say it, Thanksgiving is just a practice run because Christmas baking starts the very next day, and we literally did not stop for an entire month. So what was in store for us, though, that week of Christmas was something that I'll never forget, and I'm still surprised did not throw me into the loony bin with a nervous breakdown. Not only did the oven break, but this time it wasn't the motor. Remember I explained to you that this oven was like a carousel, and it revolved like a rotisserie as it baked, sort of like a Ferris wheel. Now, these 5 decks were made out of stone, heavy-duty stone oven decks that were sort of balancing on a metal spring, and as the whole thing rotated around, the decks stayed level and, like a Ferris wheel. That's the best way for me to explain that. Well, 3 days before Christmas, one of the decks broke loose from its metal bracket, and it snapped off and basically just careened down to the deck below, and the weight of that broke that deck and then the deck below that. Everything happened in slow motion as we're watching this very loud, very startling monstrosity happen in front of us, and every single thing that was loaded into that oven was destroyed as all the sheet pans fell to the bottom of this oven, all in an instant as we all watched it happen helplessly. I mean, screeching metal, motors burning out due to the decks all jamming up against one another. We finally hit the off switch, but the disaster that was before us on the busiest week of the year was nothing short of appalling. I mean, I could still feel the emotion of horror and nausea and utter sadness as we all just stood there in shock watching this unfold in a matter of seconds. So perhaps my PTSD or my defense mechanisms to protect my fragile inner being from this horrific trauma kicked in, because I remember very little about the cleanup and the subsequent need to keep going immediately, 3 days before Christmas, right? You can't just quit. There's hundreds of orders on the board, and, well, I think we were all operating on adrenaline at this point with just 2 more working days before the big push. We all just had to keep going. So luckily for us, this bakery was in a strip mall, and we had a neighbor 2 doors down that was a pizzeria. So we called up Phil. He gave us the key to his pizza shop so we could use his oven all through the night to do our bake-off for the remaining days to get us through Christmas until we could actually stop, catch our breath, and get somebody in to fix this oven. Really? So Eli would mix everything at his table, then load up 1 rolling rack at a time with all the sheet pans. And then because we had 4 stairs down through the back door and out to the alley, we all had to help him lift the rack loaded with the sheet pans down the stairs, and then he would cart it down the alley to the pizzeria. Then we'd have to help him hoist it up those 4 stairs into the back of the pizza kitchen, and literally back and forth and up and down and over and again until the wee hours of the morning. And we did that for the next 2 days. And then, if that was not enough to break any good man, the unthinkable happened. Yeah, it doesn't end. On the second night of this absolute nightmare scenario, our 140-quart gigantic Hobart mixer took a crap. It just stopped working. Something inside the gears broke. Maybe that string that was holding it together came apart. But whatever it was, there was no more mixing. Can you say nervous breakdown? But the show must go on, right? At this point, I just was ready to close the doors, throw the key into the lake, and drive off into the sunset, never to be seen again. But Phil, being a pizzeria, also makes pizza dough, which means he had a mixer. So we kept going. Honestly, the only thing I remember after all of this is obviously somehow by the good grace of God and everything that is holy in this world, we did it. I believe we got out all the orders. I can't remember I really don't think that we weren't able to produce everything. I think I would have remembered that. But what I do remember is that when I closed the door after the last customer left on December 25th at 6 p.m., I literally collapsed and sobbed like I haven't sobbed before. This was straight up ugly crying as I wrote out Christmas cards to all of my employees and stuffed them full of cash as a bonus and a small thank you, even though no amount of money could ever come close to their unbelievable hard work, the stamina, the determination, the sacrifice of everything healthy, mentally and physically, that we all displayed just to be able to crank out that amount of food under those circumstances was nothing short of a miracle. And with that, we closed the bakery for 1 week to recover for the new year and make plans on how we were going to approach year number 2 as the new, getting old owners of Woodland Bakery. All right, everyone, I'm going to cut it off there, and we'll pick it up in the next one. For those who are listening to this all the way through to the end, I do love reading all of your comments, and, it really does encourage me to keep on going with this, because I know that a lot of you are interested and you are listening to this. And so, I'll get to thinking about episode number 5 and what actually came next at year number 2. We definitely did one more renovation, and you better believe we did buy a brand new oven. So I'll get that all together in my thoughts, and we'll pick it up in the next one. Until then, happy vegan baking. Bye for now.